Hey friends, this is Jordan with O & Co Games. My team and I are building a pixel platformer called Tethergeist, and we have made a ton of progress that I'll be sharing in this devlog. From the very beginning, we knew Tethergeist needed a strong and compelling story. I found, at least in my experience, that the games that really stick with me, the ones that I'm always excited to pick back up at the end of the day, the ones that bring out the completionist in me, are the games that have characters and plots that I genuinely care about. And as a game designer myself, I really love how developers have used video games as the medium for telling a complex story. Games that make you think and leave you mentally processing what you just experienced. Stories that, if taken to heart, can encourage you to be more understanding of others or to be a better person. Anyway, philosophy aside, my team and I are aiming to tell a story that elicits similar feelings. Of course, a key element of telling stories in video games is the use of cutscenes. So in this devlog, I'll be explaining our process for creating cutscenes, from storyboarding to the final product. And don't worry, I will be doing so without spoiling any important parts of the story. So before we built anything related to cutscenes, we first scoped out how we wanted them to work. Based on our overarching storyline, Noah created storyboards that outline the flow of the narrative for Chapter 1. Storyboards are a great way to quickly communicate the flow of the story and visually guide us through the narrative. Honestly, it's a critical step that I think too many developers skip. With the storyboards in hand, I set out organizing them into a format that would be easy for me to implement in code. Being a UX designer by trade, I'm naturally a big fan of flowcharts. So I translated the storyboards into flowcharts to better understand what they'd structurally look like when I went to code them. I determined that there are 4 basic elements of any cutscene in our game. First, there are sequences in which sprites move on their own without any input from the player. These are scenes like May getting out of bed or NPCs walking over to talk. Second, there are conversations in which a dialog box appears and the player presses a button to progress the text. Third, there are sequences that overtake the entire screen and operate at a high resolution. Things like this intro sequence where there's just artful text on the screen. And finally, there are cutscenes in which the player must interact. For example, a selection menu to decide what to say or do after talking with an NPC. Using these 4 cutscene types, I built a flowchart for each cinematic moment in Chapter 1. So as you can see in this flowchart, there are 3 types of cutscenes that all play in sequence. There's the intro text that will fade to our character sitting up and having a conversation with her pet spirit animal Bao. The conversation will be intermittently interrupted by animations, so I depicted that in the flowchart. And the final cutscene looks like this. So with the flowcharts laid out, I got to work building the cutscene functionality in GameMaker. I created a cinematics object that is used to house several arrays of structs. Each struct contains information about what type of cutscene will be running and therefore how the code should behave. To trigger all of these cutscenes, I created a cinematics trigger object that looks for a collision with the player. When the player touches it, its predefined cutscene begins to play. Each step of the cutscene behaves according to the struct type that was assigned to it. One of the types is a sequence. GameMaker has a sequence editor that functions a lot like Adobe After Effects with keyframes and things like that. In it, you can add sprites and adjust their positions, their playback speeds, their scales, etc. over time. It's something I hadn't used in GameMaker before, but once I dug into it, it was really easy to learn. I built all of the sequences we needed for Chapter 1, and these sequences are referenced throughout the game in the cinematic trigger objects. Another step in many cutscenes is conversation. It honestly wasn't too tough to implement this since I had already built dialogue functionality in our NPCs. More details on that are in the last devlog. All I had to do was create logic in the code that automatically started up the conversation after the preceding sequence finished playing. Finally, I built cutscenes that look for player inputs. There are actually quite a few unique use cases that fit into this type of cutscene, and some of them are sort of spoilers, so I won't be showing them here. I can, however, show you this selection screen. It pops up after a conversation, and the player is given a choice to either progress the story or wait and continue exploring. The logic behind this is relatively simple. It just draws the selection menu to the UI, and it either closes the UI or triggers another cutscene, depending on what the player chooses. With all of the groundwork laid for creating cutscenes, it just became a matter of implementing them in-game by placing the cinematic triggers where they belong and creating the associated sequences and conversations for each of them. At the time of this devlog, we've just completed implementing all cutscenes for Chapter 1, and the game is now playable as a functional story from start to end of the first chapter. Now, we're still working out bugs and other details to polish it up. Even so, we're still planning to have a demo ready for everyone by the end of the year. And of course, a more polished version of that demo to follow after we've tested it and gotten feedback from all of you. Anyway, that's the current state of Tethergeist. We're really happy with how this game is coming along, and we won't quit until this game is the final work of art we envision it to be. With that said, please make sure to wishlist Tethergeist on Steam, subscribe to our channel, and join our Discord server to stay in the loop on our progress. Thanks for watching.